I remember that moment as clearly as if it happened just now. One moment I was surrounded by chaos, machines beeping, voices shouting, and then suddenly silence. Everything faded, and I felt myself slipping away, like being pulled gently from the noise of the world into something unspeakably still. There was no fear, no confusion, only an overwhelming calm that settled deep into my spirit. I didn't know where I was, but I knew I was not in the same world anymore. And in that stillness, I realized something powerful. I wasn't alone. It was as if light itself began to take form around me. Not a blinding light, but one that carried warmth, peace, and something far greater than I'd ever known on earth. Love. It was living, breathing love. In that moment, every pain, every regret, every hidden sin I had carried seemed to lose its weight. I couldn't even remember the fear of death, because death wasn't the end, it was a doorway. And then I knew I was standing before Jesus. His presence wasn't like what I'd imagined from paintings or sermons. It wasn't distant or formal. It was deeply personal. He looked at me, not at my achievements, not at my failures, but into me. His eyes held truth so pure that I felt completely exposed, yet completely accepted. There was no accusation, only understanding. No rejection, only grace. I didn't hear his voice with my ears, but in my spirit. Every word from him was like a wave of light and meaning washing through me. He didn't need to ask me who I was or what I had done. He already knew it all. And still, he smiled. That smile carried more forgiveness than I had ever thought possible. I remember thinking, if this is what love looks like, I never knew love at all. He began to show me moments from my life, not to shame me, but to reveal truth. I saw myself striving, preaching, praying, yet often running on empty inside. I saw how I had filled the silence of my own soul with business, pride, and at times, hidden struggles that I had never dared to confess. And yet, in all those moments, Jesus had been there, waiting not with anger, but with longing. There was a kind of holy transparency in that encounter. I couldn't hide, and I didn't want to. His love made hiding impossible and unnecessary. I realized then that what he wanted was not my perfection, but my surrender. In that eternal space, time didn't exist, but truth did. Every thought and intention of my heart stood open before him, and still, his love held me steady. I felt his hand rest on me, not like human touch, but like peace itself taking hold of my soul. And in that embrace, I knew I was safe, fully known, and fully loved. For the first time, I understood that dying was not the end of life. It was the beginning of seeing clearly. And in that clarity, I heard him say softly, "Now, I must show you something." When he spoke, it wasn't with the kind of voice you hear with your ears. It was a voice that resonated inside me, like a living sound that carried both truth and tenderness. Every word from Jesus seemed to bypass the mind and go straight into the heart. I didn't feel like I was being interrogated or judged. Instead, I felt like a beloved child being spoken to by a father who had waited a long time for this conversation. There was no fear, only this overwhelming realization that I was completely seen and still completely loved. He looked at me with eyes that seemed to contain eternity itself. And in that gaze, I could feel layers of my pride, my insecurities, my masks, all the things I hidden behind, falling away. His presence made pretense impossible. I tried to speak, but no words came. My thoughts were laid bare before him, and he understood them before I could even form a sentence. I had spent my whole life preaching about grace, but in that moment, I was experiencing it in its purest form. It wasn't a theological concept anymore. It was a person standing before me. What struck me most was how Jesus didn't begin with rebuke. He began with love. He reminded me of moments in my life where I had shown kindness, moments where I had wept for others, moments when I had chosen forgiveness over resentment. It was as though he wanted me to see that he had noticed it all. The small things, the unseen acts of mercy, the prayers whispered in the dark. And then, almost seamlessly, he began to show me where I had drifted. Not through accusation, but through revelation. He said, "You have done much for me, but there were times you forgot to be with me." Those words pierced me deeper than any judgment ever could. I realized that even in ministry, even in serving others, I had sometimes lost the intimacy of simply knowing him. I had spoken about Jesus more than I had spoken with him. And there he was, face to face, reminding me that the relationship mattered more than the results. In his voice, there was no condemnation. He didn't list my sins like a prosecutor. He unfolded them like a healer showing a wound before applying the cure. Every truth he spoke carried grace with it. Every correction felt like an invitation back into love. It was as if he was saying, "I didn't bring you here to punish you. I brought you here to restore you." And then, with a gentleness I can't describe, he began to touch on areas of my heart that I thought were long buried. He spoke of loneliness, the human longing for connection, and how even good people can seek comfort in wrong places when the heart feels empty. He didn't shame me, he understood me. That understanding was more powerful than any sermon I had ever preached. In that sacred moment, I realized that his love confronts without crushing, corrects without condemning, and exposes not to humiliate, but to heal. And just as I was beginning to weep under the weight of that love, he looked at me with eyes full of compassion and said, "There is something more I want you to understand about purity, about your heart, and about the hunger that so many carry in secret." When he said those words, I felt a stillness fall over my soul. There was something in his tone, firm, yet filled with mercy, that told me this next part wasn't about theology or doctrine, but about something deeply personal. Jesus looked at me, and I could sense he was about to speak to the part of my heart I had always kept locked away. His presence was so holy that every thought became transparent. And then he began to speak about purity, not the way men speak about it, with guilt or embarrassment, but the way heaven sees it, as something sacred, something beautiful that has been misunderstood and misused. He said, "Many of my children live in quiet shame, not because they are evil, but because they are broken. They carry desires they don't understand, and instead of bringing them to me, they hide them." His words pierced me. It was as if he was holding a mirror to my soul, showing me the years I had struggled with human weakness, the times I had tried to silence my temptations with business or spiritual pride. He wasn't condemning me. He was inviting me into honesty. He spoke gently about how the body and spirit are deeply connected, how even physical desires were created by God for intimacy, not for guilt. "It is not the desire itself that destroys," he said, "but when the desire becomes detached from love, from purpose, from me." I understood in that instant that what we often call impurity is not just about actions. It's about direction. Desire that flows toward love and connection is pure. Desire that flows toward isolation and self-gratification becomes distorted. Jesus showed me that many people fall into cycles of masturbation or lust, not because they are wicked, but because they are searching for comfort, for closeness, for something to fill a void that only his presence can satisfy. They reach for flesh, he said, when their souls are starving for spirit. It wasn't a tone of anger. It was the tone of someone who deeply grieves for those he loves. And then he looked at me and said, "You have spoken to others about discipline, but have you told them about loneliness? Have you told them that I understand the ache that drives them to these secret places?" I couldn't hold back tears. For the first time, I saw how many believers live under weight of shame because they don't realize that Jesus sees their struggle not with disgust, but with compassion. He wants to heal the heart, not humiliate the sinner. He made it clear that the issue was never about physical acts alone. It was about spiritual hunger. Every misuse of the body is a symptom of a deeper spiritual emptiness. I did not come to control you, he said. I came to complete you. That sentence alone shattered something inside me. I realized purity was not suppression, it was fulfillment in him. And as he spoke, light began to fill those dark corners of my soul where secrecy had lived. I felt no shame, only release, only the realization that the one who knows everything still chooses to love completely. And then he said quietly, now, let me show you what this hunger was always meant to lead you toward. When Jesus began to reveal the deeper meaning behind all of this, I could sense that he wasn't just addressing one behavior, but the entire condition of the human heart. His words carried such clarity that it felt as though truth itself was unfolding before me. He said, you see, what the world calls pleasure is often a cry for connection. What people call sin is often the shadow of a misplaced longing. I stood there silent because I understood then that he wasn't talking about rules. He was talking about the hunger every soul carries, the hunger that only love can satisfy. He began to show me how even something like masturbation wasn't about the physical act alone. It was about the heart's attempt to soothe itself, to fill an emptiness that was never meant to be filled by the self. You were created, he said, for intimacy that reflects heaven. But when intimacy is cut off from me, it becomes an echo instead of a song. Those words sank deep into my spirit. I realized that every human desire, when disconnected from divine purpose, begins to feed on itself instead of giving life. What was meant to draw us toward love can, in isolation, trap us in loneliness. Jesus' tone was never harsh. He spoke like a physician describing the cause of a sickness, not to condemn but to cure. The body, he said, is not your enemy. The mind is not your prison. But when the heart forgets its true source, it begins to search in shadows. And he showed me how people reach for what is immediate because they've lost sight of what is eternal. The quick comfort of the flesh can feel like relief, but it leaves the spirit even hungrier than before. He said, every time my children turn to creation instead of the Creator, they feel a moment of pleasure followed by a wave of guilt. That guilt is not from me. It is the soul remembering what it was made for. Those words changed the way I saw everything. It wasn't about trying harder to resist. It was about returning to the one who satisfies. Freedom was not in suppression, it was in restoration. When love is restored to its rightful place, the counterfeit loses its power. I asked him softly, then what must we do, Lord? And he smiled. Come back to me. Let me be the one who fills you. There are certain desires. Redirect it. Let your longing become prayer. Let your weakness become worship. His eyes were filled with compassion as he spoke. You are not unclean for being tempted. You become whole when you bring your temptation into my light. In that instant, I felt wave after wave of peace washing over me. The shame I had carried for years melted away. I understood finally that Jesus wasn't trying to take something from me. He was trying to give me something infinitely better, the joy of being known and loved without hiding. And as that realization settled deep within my spirit, he said, this is the truth I want my children to know. What they seek in secret can only be satisfied in my presence. As he continued to speak, the light around us seemed to grow even softer, yet it carried a weight, a holy stillness that made every word echo deep within me. Jesus looked at me and said, freedom does not begin when you stop sinning. It begins when you stop hiding. Those words hit me like a flood of grace. I realized that for years, I had tried to fight my weaknesses in secret, praying that no one would ever find out, thinking that silence was strength. But in that moment, I saw how secrecy was not strength, it was slavery. The very thing I tried to conquer in the dark was the thing that grew stronger in the dark. He said, "When you bring what's hidden into my light, the chains lose their power." I could feel his compassion so tangibly, as if every part of me that had been bound in shame was being gently unwrapped. It wasn't an instant of condemnation. It was an awakening. Jesus was showing me that real healing requires honesty, not perfection. "You don't need to impress me," he said. "I was there in your weakness. I am not shocked by your struggle. What I desire is your surrender." I felt tears falling freely as he spoke. I had spent much of my life trying to prove my holiness, as if God's love depended on my performance. But here he was, dismantling all of that striving with one sentence. "I never asked for your strength. I asked for your trust." It was in that moment that I understood the meaning of grace more clearly than ever before. Grace wasn't an excuse to keep falling. It was the power to rise again because you finally know you are loved. Jesus began to show me how healing flows when the heart becomes transparent, when confession is no longer a fearful duty, but a doorway to freedom, he said. "There are many who repent with their mouths, but still hide in their hearts. They come to me asking for forgiveness, yet they never give me the wound itself." And I saw how I had done that too. Offering apologies but holding on to the shame, as if God couldn't handle the truth of who I was. He told me, "Bring me your desires. Bring me your weaknesses. Don't come to me only when you are strong. Come especially when you are broken." I understood then that healing wasn't just about quitting a habit. It was about entering a deeper relationship. When I stopped fighting to be perfect and started walking honestly with him, I found that purity became less of a struggle and more of a natural response to his love. He reminded me that we were never meant to overcome temptation alone. The Spirit, community, prayer, and truth. All of these are channels of his grace. Isolation feeds shame, he said, but honesty invites freedom. And in that moment, I knew what real transformation looked like. It wasn't hiding your battle. It was inviting Jesus into it. And then he looked at me with that same piercing kindness and said, "Tell my people this. I do not heal what they pretend isn't broken. I heal what they bring to me." As he continued to speak, I began to realize that the true shock of this encounter wasn't in the topic itself. It was in the tenderness of his message. Jesus was not angry, and he wasn't giving me a list of do's and don'ts. He was revealing something far greater, that his heart for humanity has always been about love, not law, he said. "So many life burdened, believing they must earn my approval through behavior, when all I have ever desired is their hearts." His eyes glowed with compassion as he spoke those words, and I felt an ache inside me, the ache of someone who finally realizes how often he has tried to serve God without truly resting in him. He said, "When I walked among men, I didn't come to build walls of condemnation. I came to tear them down. The world calls people sinners and rejects them. I call them wounded and redeem them." I could feel his sorrow for those who live trapped in cycles of guilt, convinced that God's patience must have run out. "Tell them," he said, "that I never turn away from a sincere heart. The only thing that separates them from me is the lie that they are unworthy of my presence." Those words changed everything. In his voice, there was no trace of disappointment, only the longing of a father who wants his children home. He showed me how many people fight secret battles, thinking that purity is the goal, when in truth, intimacy is the goal. When love fills the heart, he said, sin loses its attraction. You cannot fight darkness by staring at it. You overcome it by letting in the light. And that light was not a set of rules or rituals. It was his love itself. I realized then that holiness was never about restriction. It was about restoration. For Psalms, the heart that knows it is loved will naturally begin choose what honors that love. I remembered how he said, I am not looking for perfect performance. I am looking for perfect surrender. Those words echoed again and again inside me. He wasn't asking me to live flawlessly. He was asking me to live faithfully, to trust Him enough to bring every weakness into His grace. When you fall, He said, don't run from me, run to me. Every scar, every struggle, every temptation can become a testimony when placed in my hands. It struck me then that what He was revealing wasn't just for me. It was for everyone who has ever felt trapped between desire and guilt, who has believed that God's holiness makes Him distant. Jesus was showing me that His holiness doesn't push us away. It draws us closer because it's rooted in love, not judgment. And then He looked at me one final time with a smile that seemed to carry all of heaven's gentleness and said, tell them this. I didn't come to make them ashamed of their humanity. I came to show them how deeply they are loved even in it.